It's a half-hour drive to the nearest town. The forests around stretch for miles without any obvious landmarks. So yeah, let's clear out an acre or two and put a house right there. Surely no weird creatures will haunt the folks that live here, right? Well, unfortunately, that's not the case for some unlucky people. Today, I've got some allegedly true and scary stories about monsters that have been found, sighted, or encountered in the middle of nowhere. If you have a scary story of your own, share it with us at darkstories.org. I'd love to narrate some stories about Yosemite National Park. Also, check out eriecast.com to follow my podcasts. Now, let's begin. It came from the attic. From George. When I was 12, my parents moved us into an old brick house, a 20-minute drive from the nearby town. There were a couple of neighbors up and down the road from us, but we never really got to know them. It was mostly just cedar trees in every direction. I would later learn from my mom that this home was pretty old and had not been lived in for a couple of decades. My parents were happy to have purchased the home at such a competitive price, though it doesn't sound like they even had any other buyers to compete with at the time. I also recently learned that the old house has long since been demolished. Now, being 12, you'd think moving to a new home would be a bit tougher on me, but I welcomed it. We were still within the region, so I wouldn't have to change schools. I would just have to take a bus from there on out. And my parents seemed so much happier. My dad found himself to be a passionate gardener, and my mother absolutely enjoyed raising a small pen of chickens there. As for the house itself, the place was amazingly well put together. Despite its obvious age, the wiring worked perfectly, as did the plumbing. The gas lines never gave us trouble either. Sure, we had the creaking floorboards and all that, but nothing really fell apart. Whoever had built the home had put their care and patience into building it. Made it that much easier for my family to fall in love with the place. Things began getting weird there after moving in. It all started with noises in the attic. The sound of something crawling around up there, starting around sundown. Of course, the usual explanations were made. Dad said it was squirrels or a barn owl, while Mom said that raccoons and possums were quite common around these parts. The sound really only annoyed my dad, as he saw it as some rodent encroaching on his comfort and prized home. As for me, it was kind of soothing to fall asleep to. I would imagine little squirrels getting ready for shut-eye at dusk, or getting playful in the night. There were other circumstances, though. Every once in a long while, one of Mom's chickens would go missing. We would never find it, though. Not even a feather trail would be left, forcing Mom to assume that the chicken had somehow escaped of its own volition. Every couple of months when it happened, she'd simply rework her chicken pen, or upgrade it in some way. At a point, so many improvements to the pen actually worked, and the chicken disappearances stopped. I did experience something rather weird one morning when those chicken disappearances were at their height. Before daybreak, around 5:30 a.m. each school day, I'd have to wake up, get ready, then throw the chickens some feed on the way to the bus stop. Simple enough. After a couple of months, it became so routine to me, it'd be easy to forget doing any of it once I would finally fully wake up during the bus ride. I can't tell you how many times my autopilot mode had me paranoid that I'd forgotten to feed the chickens, though in actuality I had never made that mistake. As an adult, it's kind of like driving to work, but getting there and not even remembering the drive. Routines that have become deeply programmed into you, like that, are a curious thing. So, when something strange happens, interrupting your routine, you become quickly and fully aware of it. Now, during my morning rituals, my parents are usually already gone and off to work. They were both home by noon each day, meaning I was alone whenever I went to the bus stop. On my way out the door, that particular morning, a half-eaten Pop-Tart in my free hand, I started to make my way to the chicken pen. In my other hand was a plastic green scoop full of chicken feed. As usual, once I made it to the pen, I opened the wire gate and I tossed the feed inside, making sure to spread it around a bit. The chickens went wild, excitedly munching down on their breakfast, while I shut the wire gate and made my way back to the front door to slide the scoop back into the feed bag. After that, I began walking down the dirt path to the road. I recall that morning being especially foggy. There was a large pond on the property, so we were no strangers to fog in the early hours of the day. But that day, the mist was peculiarly thick. I had at most 20 yards of visibility before things began to fade into silhouettes and eventually into nothingness. When I made it to about 25 yards past the chicken coop, I heard a noise that made me come to a complete stop. Once they settled down into their meal, the chickens were usually quiet as they ate, with an occasional cluck. But what I had heard was a sudden stir and panic from the chickens inside the pen. The sound of feathers rustling together and anxious clucks are very distinct. I turned around and started to walk back toward the pen. At the time, the walls of the pen were about 5 feet up with a wire mesh covering the top. As I stepped a few feet closer, however, I gasped. I remember how wide my eyes went. There was a dark silhouette standing next to the chicken pen. With ease, the figure had not only peeled back the wire mesh that made up the top of the pen, but they were tall enough to need to lean down to reach through the top and grab one of the chickens. In fact, the arm was already in the process of coming back up with one of our hens in hand. I stood there in shock. Maybe I should have shouted at least, but the proportions of the figure were all out of whack. I mean, what kind of tall, lanky, chicken-stealing weirdo had been coming out onto our property when they thought we were gone to take our chickens? This stranger was tall enough to just peel back the top and lean in to have his choice of our livestock. When I nervously cleared my throat, I saw the arm twitch. After a brief moment, it then yanked the chicken out, letting go of the top of the pen and disappearing into the fog. I remember running toward the bus stop after that, the only familiar direction where that creepy stranger couldn't be. I wish I could have run inside the house, but that would have brought me closer to where the stranger had been standing. Those next 15 minutes as I sat there waiting for the bus to arrive were the most terrifying moments in my life, at the time at least. From any direction and at any point, that figure could appear from the mist. When the bus came and the door opened, I ran so frantically up the steps I tripped. The embarrassment of that only hit me when I was safe in a bus seat and the vehicle was driving away from my home. I couldn't even bring myself to look out the window. After school that day, I came home to a very angry mother. When I asked what was wrong with her, I already knew the answer. Another missing chicken, the one I'd seen get taken. She was busy trying to find where it could have escaped from when I hesitantly tugged on her shirt. Then I explained exactly what I saw this morning. Of course, she was suspicious of such a weird story. After all, a struggling chicken would usually lose a few feathers. When I mentioned the figure peeling off the top of the enclosure, her eyebrow shot up. Apparently, she hadn't yet inspected the top mesh. I watched her pull the wire mesh up effortlessly, meaning something had in fact broken into it, or out of it. She cursed under her breath. I thought she would have believed my story a bit more, but she didn't bring it up after that. Mom simply seemed focused on fixing the pen. I think this only cemented her thought that there was some way the chickens were getting out of the coop. Now she had reason to believe they were just jumping or flying out through the top. Luckily, Dad was much more open to my story. In fact, he believed me from the start. Maybe that's no surprise, seeing how territorially he reacted to the mere idea of squirrels walking around our attic. A week after that, Dad had purchased a new rifle and a new pistol, with some ammunition. He then replaced the doorknobs and locks to the entryways of the house. It made me feel safer knowing my dad was looking out for us. But when you're expecting one thing, and it happens to be something else entirely, you're never prepared enough. This next part brings me to the period of living in the house when I began to think the place was haunted. It started with the sounds in the attic, but about a year later, those sounds started to move further than the attic. As I've always had difficulty sleeping and staying asleep, I was of course the first in the house to hear the sounds move from the attic to the kitchen for the first time. This progression was natural, I guess, since the entryway to the attic was in the kitchen. And if it really was a raccoon or possum, the kitchen would be pretty tempting to them. With the mysterious steps finally resounding from the same floor as us, they were more clear too. I soon realized what was making the sounds was heavier than I first assumed. What had at first sounded like light pitter-patter in the attic now sounded like human-sized steps walking through the kitchen and into the hallway. The first couple of times I heard it, I listened intently. They would go from attic to kitchen to hallway, then back a few times before going back into the attic and stopping for the night. After experiencing this 2 more times, I was sure that the house was haunted. I told my parents and asked them if they had heard any noises at night too. Mom reminded me it was an old house, and old houses creak when the temperature and pressure change. While that made sense, it just didn't make sense to me that old house noises sounded exactly like a heavy person walking around the home. Once again, Dad's will to protect the home brought him to my side. For the next month after that, Dad stayed up in the living room with his rifle in hand and listened. To my annoyance, though, the noises did not pick up again until after my dad gave up, having not heard or seen anything himself. Was I going crazy? Had I been dreaming all this time? I wondered. One night, wanting to see this ghost, to at least prove it to myself, I stayed awake and kept my bedroom door wide open. The door faced the hallway and had a slim view of the kitchen through the end of the hall. That night, I waited and waited and waited. It took a few hours before finally the attic noises started up. At first, I wanted to rush out of bed and wake my parents to have them listen, but something told me the noises would stop if I got up. This spirit was seemingly aware if we were watching. I thought to myself that's probably why Dad hadn't seen or heard anything for a month straight. It knew he was in the living room. I could hear the attic door creak slowly open, then shut. After a few moments of silence, the heavy steps began. Before long, I saw a tall silhouette pass through the kitchen archway and into the living room. Excitedly, I covered my face. I knew it. I remember thinking with a smile, this house is haunted. I don't know why I wasn't scared after seeing that. Guess I was more fascinated by the supernatural than scared. So I lay there listening to the footsteps. As usual, they came down the hallway right past my open door, then back up into the kitchen, before it went silent. Whatever it was, it had completed its routine already, and was done for the night. With a smile, I yanked the blanket off my face, thinking about the story I'd have to share with my friends at school on Monday. I froze. I'd never felt so absolutely, devastatingly sick to my stomach before. My chest felt as if it was caving in on itself. There, next to my bed, stood a tall silhouette, so tall its head touched the ceiling. I saw its midsection first, before glancing up at its face. What I remember are white, pupilless eyes, pointed ears, and scruffy fur around its neck and elongated snout. Extremely long arms held up, as if the thing didn't know what to do with them. Attached to those arms were hands with pointed fingers. I could clearly see its chest expanding and contracting as it breathed. A torso thin and bony. I can even remember feeling a warm, wet glob of drool hit my hand from the thing's mouth as it stood over me. That's how close to my bed it had gotten. Had it only stopped because I suddenly moved? And how could it have possibly walked into my room without making the slightest noise, compared to how noisy it had been walking around the house? As any normal kid would, I screamed so hard my lungs were likely on the verge of collapsing. In the same second, movement came from my parents' room as my dad came rushing to check on me. The creature's ear turned like a radar dish in the direction of the hallway. Then it took 2 large steps before launching itself through the closed window of my room, shattering the glass. I caught a glimpse of its legs then, so long and thin and weirdly curved, with knees that seemed to bend the wrong way. Dad was standing in the mess of the shattered window in moments, asking what in the world happened. I sat silently, horrified, and in utter disbelief of what I'd just seen. I never heard sounds in the attic again. It was soon apparent that thing had been living in our attic. It had been very cautious and patient with stealing our chickens, not taking too much, not leaving the attic until Mom's chicken pen was too difficult to break into, not walking around looking for scraps of food unless it knew everyone was in bed. That thing had been all skin and bones. So if it had been so afraid of us for so long, what made it come into my room? I dread understanding why, but it's quite obvious to me. Predators are nearly completely silent when stalking prey. When desperate, they'll target animals they may not have targeted before, but they'll still go for the safer, smaller target. It saw my bedroom door open and walked right in. In the Dark of Winter, from Will-O-Wisp. My sister and I live very interesting lives. Throughout our years, we have always experienced the paranormal. Both good and bad, and a mix of whoever or whatever decides to come and say hello. Recently, something else decided to come along. To most people, it's just an Algonquin myth, a scary story and nothing more. I cannot stress how wrong they are. These experiences are scattered, a mix of mine and my sister Bethany's, and still occurring. For me, they began in late summer 2020. We live in rural northern East Coast America, real close to the Canadian border. We have animals, Sarge, an Australian Shepherd Black Lab, and Wicket, my black and white barn cat. Wicket loves to sometimes sneak out at night, which is worrisome, as our backyard is nothing but woods. Sometimes he succeeds, and when he's ready to come back in, he'll paw at the glass of our patio door connected to the living room, creating a rubbing sound. Encounter 1. Late one summer night, I was settled on our couch playing Left 4 Dead or watching YouTube. I was the only one awake. Nothing else was going on but me trying to avoid the zombies on my TV. I was interrupted when I heard Wicket pawing at the glass behind me. Annoyed, I paused my game and checked the time. 11 p.m. I scowled at my furry friend as I proceeded to get up and turn towards the curtain-drawn patio threshold. I stopped. Wicket was scurrying away from it in a panic, and the pawing continued. I stared in bewilderment, and the more carefully I listened, I realized I could hear a light thump against the glass before a limb was dragged down it. It was making that bare skin against glass rubbing noise, but slightly louder and slowly. It went on for some time, even when I hunkered down into the blankets in an attempt to instinctively hide. Eventually, I heard it stop and something shuffle away from the entrance. Encounter 2. Sarge also has a way to let us know when he's ready to come inside. A single chirp-like bark. Beth and my mother sometimes drive into work together for an extremely early morning shift. So early it's still blackout. This experience was during one of those mornings. As they get ready to leave for these shifts, they let Sarge out to do his business, and he signals when he's done. I didn't have a reason to get up since he was with them, so I thought I'd lay in bed listening to their shenanigans in the dark. When, very suddenly, I heard that single bark coming from the backyard, and soon Beth was out on the porch. Seconds later, she's calling for him, since she couldn't see him anywhere. I heard our dog climbing to his feet from the second floor of our home and clambering down the stairs to meet her at the front door. I froze. I had heard him outside, though. I heard Beth say something in shock, but I was unsure what. I looked outside into the woods, however, I didn't hear it again. I guess Mom didn't hear it, though. She must have been on the other side of the house. No one heard it again, before or after they left. Encounter 3. This experience is the one I don't like to talk about or even think of. 3 or 4 months have passed with no further occurrence since summer. I thought whatever it was had left, so I didn't think anything else of it. We're now in December 2020. Beth had gone to visit her boyfriend who lives an hour away. I loved going out for late evening walks with my headphones on. I went out for a quick stroll, enjoying the darkening scenery and alone time. I passed this small graveyard I live down the road by, which has some woods, a small field behind it, and more woods behind that. Nothing happened during the time out there. However, when I decided to turn around, I got an odd feeling in my chest. I don't really think much of it since I was heading back anyway. I'm about to pass by the cemetery again, and decided to turn down my music all the way and take my headphones off to adjust them. As I did, I slowed down when I picked up on a faint smell. There had been absolutely no smell before. Not too strong, but enough to startle me. It was the unpleasant scent of nasty, rotten meat. I was wondering what smelled like that. I picked up my pace and was about to put my headphones back in, when... Kayla... My veins went cold. I fully faced that dark wooded field. Bethany wasn't home, my sister wasn't home, yet I heard her shouting my name loud and clear. At first, there was nothing. I saw nothing, but something was seeing me. In my hurried pace home, I wanted to run, but intuition was screaming at me not to. I listened, although I kept my stride a bit faster than before. The whole time I felt I wasn't alone, and the more these experiences keep happening, the more apparent we're not. I get inside, lock the door, and hunker down thinking of what I just heard. It sounded like my sister, just like her. However, I realized when I heard her voice, I remembered also hearing this odd feedback behind it. A very strange and distorted, warbling, freakish feedback. I haven't been out after dark since. Bethany's experience. On another extremely early morning shift to work during a crappy snowstorm, Bethany might have seen it. She was driving down a mucky strip of road with two more bigger fields on either side and the forests far back behind them. Through the falling snow, her headlights partially illuminated something by the lane opposite of her. Something humanoid and tall, very thin, and what she told me possibly holding itself. The silhouetted top half of its body was bunched, like it was trying to shield itself from the cold. It caught her off guard. Her driving slowed for a moment when she passed by, thinking what it could have been. But her own instincts urgently told her to not look and to keep going, especially knowing there was nothing in those fields that close to the road. She sped away, leaving whatever it was behind. It was confirmed she really did see something. On her way back, it was gone. Encounter 4. January 2021. I came home from one of my shifts all excited one evening, since a couple of my old friends were in the area and had decided to visit. We don't see each other a whole lot anymore. I swung the car door open and hopped out, just for my excitement to be washed away. I was immediately hit in the face with a god-awful smell of rot. It was so bad, it stopped me in my tracks while a feeling of absolute dread washed over me. And then my intuition told me, it's by the shed. I didn't look. I could feel it was there. I was just about ready to leap into the car again for some sort of safety barrier. However, Bethany ripped the curtains open, unaware what was going on, and hollered happily for me to get inside. I didn't hesitate. I bolted, soon to be met with everyone. Seeing my friends had me scramble to hide my distress to keep them from worrying. Quickly, I was able to forget the occurrence for the time being. We caught up with life and had a good time. After our catch-up, they had to leave, and I had to move our vehicle out of the way. Once outside again, I noticed that the death stench had completely vanished. No trace at all. There were only the smells of pine trees and snowy dirt. The next morning, I noticed over on my neighbor's shed nearby, the snow was disturbed, and the branches were flattened down on the roof. It looked as if there was something crouched there, hidden between two trees framing the back end, checking us out, very close. I can keep going, but it's just feeling extreme dread or smelling and hearing it more than anything now. Scratching or knocking at the windows. Once in a while it barks at us in my dog's voice and that creepy feedback it gives off. I know what coyotes and wolves sound like, and they aren't the answer here. One time it barked at all three of us, Bethany, Sarge, and I, which had Sarge whirl around and bolt into the house from hearing himself in the trees. This is something he's never done. Bethany may have seen it a second time, a bony figure crouched in itself not far from our home. I might have too. A shoulder, upper arm, and a bald head quickly ducked behind the shed one night when I turned the patio light on. Tall in height, horribly thin, and pale, but fast, so darn fast. We've heard it scream a couple of times as well. Pained, frustrated screams unlike anything we've ever heard. I looked up everything we have around here. Bobcat, cougar, fox, deer, wolf, you name it. But no similarities. None. Once it made a noise I have a very hard time describing, but fully know it scared the holy heck out of me. The sounds this thing makes, I can't forget them. I want to try and record them in the future, but I'm too darn nervous, and they're always so sudden. We finally caught a break though. There's people renting a cabin next to us, and there's also ice fishers and skidoos around. So it's been really quiet, for now. We cope by joking around, calling it our neighbor and such. Aside from that, This is scary. I'm hoping the bears wake up soon. Maybe they can scare it away. I've learned for some reason it's scared of the big furry animals. I'm worried what will happen when everyone leaves until they come out of hibernation. It acts up whenever the two of us are alone. With the thought always in mind, I'm going to look into crystal gridding my property and home, along with other protection methods. I know how close it's gotten, and we're lucky, very lucky, it's done nothing more than what it's been doing so far. Often I wonder what happened, who the poor soul is that became this thing. But that is all I'll be left with, thinking of what its situation may have been. I've always known they're real, elusive as heck, but a true creature. When you hear the stories, when you hear the encounters, you think, God, I hope I don't have to go through that. Or, yeah, okay, how can something like that happen? But when it does happen to you, it changes you and your view of everything. There's so much more in the world than just animals and humans. Believe me, I know. Be careful. Stalked by Bigfoot. From Anonymous. I was going for a drive with one of my friends a few months ago. We'd just been to the beach and we were heading to her house. We decided to take the scenic route because it was a nice quiet day and we both loved going for car drives. We ended up driving along a road surrounded by dense forest. If you were to walk straight from the road through the forest, you would only see thick pine trees for miles. I'd never seen this road before, and neither had my friend. We were a bit agitated now because it became silent all of a sudden. We had the windows down and only a few seconds ago, we could hear birds chirping and all the other sounds of nature. But suddenly it had all stopped. All we could hear now was the car's engine. We kept driving for a while. It seemed like this road went on forever. At one point, my friend pulled over to the side of the road because she saw something she wanted to check out. I was against this because I was freaked out already, but I ended up following her out of the car and towards a tree along the side of the road. It had been completely pulled out of the ground. When I bent down closer to look at it, I saw lots of thick, dark hair covering it. This didn't make me feel any better. My friend decided to collect some of the hair and take them home. I tried to protest, but there was nothing I could do to change her mind. We then got back in the car and began to drive along the road again. We were only driving for a bit before I noticed something in the rearview mirror. I pointed it out to my friend and she slammed on the brakes. She stared in the mirror. "What the heck is that?" she asked, but not in a nervous way, but more in a way that she wanted to go back and look at it. Even though this creature was very far behind us, it was huge. It was at least 8 feet tall, covered in thick black hair, and it had piercing black eyes. We both sat there silently, watching this thing as it stared back at us. Then it suddenly started coming towards us. I screamed at my friend to drive, and she did. We sped away and had no intention of staying on that creepy road. We finally made it off that road and parked the car so we could talk about what just happened. After a while of talking and processing what happened, I looked behind us at the road, and I saw it again, just standing there and staring. We then went home, very quickly I might add. We didn't see that thing again that day, thankfully, and I haven't seen it since. I don't want to see it again.